What's wrong with this headline? All the talk on mainstream media is about whether the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, committed a war crime by ordering survivors of a strike. This is off the waters of in the Caribbean. These are the Venezuelan gunboats or narco-terrorists he's trying to target. After he ordered that survivors of that strike, clinging to some wreckage, were to be killed, and they were killed by a second strike, apparently. Now, Hegseth, who styles himself, of course, as the Secretary of War rather than the Secretary of Defense, he's renamed the Defense Department the Department of War. He and the White House now seem to be trying to throw an admiral under the bus, blaming the admiral for this killing. And remember, originally, Hegseth claimed this is all fake news, nothing happened. Now the White House is confirming it did happen. Now, I was following this story a little bit earlier, back before it began to garner the kind of 24/7 news attention it has at the moment. And you can take a look at it here. We'll put up a link in the comments below so you can take a look at the original video. And in that one, I was looking more at the big picture constitutional problems that Trump's running afoul of with his alleged war on narco-terrorist organizations, where he plays judge and executioner. However, here, I want to point out there is a fundamental assumption going on that isn't getting enough attention. And that assumption is whether it's a war crime or just plain murder. So let's break down what's wrong with the mostly mainstream analysis of that and what would be involved with charging the Secretary of War with murder. Let's break it down. But before we do that, let me remind you to subscribe to our channel and make us the biggest and the best. We're getting there. We're very close to 1 million, so help us get there. Now, the war crimes discussion is getting a lot of publicity, and there's a lot of legal and constitutional nuance to that. For example, the well-established fact that everybody agrees on is the military cannot give a cowboy-like heartless order just to kill everybody. That's the kind of image that Secretary Hegseth likes for himself. And it's alleged he did say something like that, kill them all. And if that is the case, that's clearly the illegal order. Now, if you do that during war, that would be a potential alleged war crime to be prosecuted and looked into. But here's the point I want to make. You can't have a war crime when there is no war. Again, going back to the earlier analysis I'd done in September, there's been no proper use of the power of war, right? No invocation of the War Powers Act. Trump's not reporting to Congress. He's not even, well, he's trying to use the so-called AUMF doctrine, which is the one we've used to go after terrorists. But the problem is there's no state of war going on with Venezuela, although he's trying damn hard to make one. And there's no such thing as a, quote, narco-terrorist. That's a term Trump's kind of made up. It's a term of art that gets thrown around, but there's no recognized term of a narco-terrorist. In other words, there's no actual authorized military action that's happening. The mere fact that you use the military to harm and kill people doesn't make it an authorized military action. That would have about as much validity as saying any soldier who murders somebody is actually automatically undertaking authorized military actions. Obviously untrue, depends entirely on the circumstances. There could be grave repercussions for Trump and his secretary over the war crimes aspect of this, but I want to point out that it can also be viewed as simply murder. If we look at it from a murder analysis, that's typically a state crime, not prosecuted by the feds. But here, obviously, there's a strong federal hook. There could be a prosecution under federal law for murder, and those elements and types of scenarios are mostly laid out here at 18 U.S.C. 1111. There are other crimes that qualify as federal murders: killing a judge, federal officials, trying to obstruct justice, killing witnesses. But this is the general murder statute, and the killing of unarmed survivors clinging to wreckage in the Caribbean would possibly fall under the maritime jurisdiction to the extent that the murder is being committed by a U.S. vessel, or at least the vessel is being used to commit that murder. Usually, murder at sea, for example, on a cruise ship, the jurisdiction issues, don't want to kid you, they'd be tricky here. They depend on the flag of the ship where it occurred. So here, arguably, Venezuela, has a dog in this fight, right? They could assume jurisdiction and charge Hegseth with murder. It's a Venezuelan ship, I think. They'd have to sort of own up to that fact. So that's all kind of murky. Of course, highly unlikely the U.S. is going to cooperate with any Venezuelan prosecution of their Secretary of Defense. But they could go ahead and bring those charges. And the idea of the U.S. bringing a federal murder charge not under the military justice system is possible. But normally we wouldn't even be talking about that. We'd be talking about the military system of justice. But that may not work so well here because guess who is in charge of the Defense Department? Hegseth. And Trump is theoretically the commander-in-chief. And one of the things they've already tried to do is to get rid of the military lawyers, the judge advocate generals, the leadership, they've already tried to get rid of him. Now, why would you need to do that? Well, as Shakespeare always reminds us, one of my favorite quotes, if you really want tyranny, quote, first thing you do is let's kill all the lawyers. So Trump and Hegseth took that figurative step by getting rid of the JAG Corps leadership. In any event, the JAG Corps has no independent prosecutorial ability outside of military commanders, which is what makes it more likely that the Trump administration would and could order the court-martial of lower level. I mean, if you consider an admiral lower level, or operational military people, maybe as high up as the admiral. But it makes that method very impractical for holding Hegseth himself accountable under a military court system. That's not going to work. And normally, the idea that DOJ might entertain the idea of bringing a prosecution against a federal official here would be something to look at. But of course, guess who's head of DOJ? I mean, it's just not going to happen. Nonetheless, we have to remember, murder has no statute of limitations. So a future Department of Justice that didn't fear being looked at, oh, you're being retaliatory, vindictive, but actually was looking at doing justice, they might take a look at this to hold a former cabinet level official accountable for ordering murders. But it's usually a state prosecution, so one other question to look at is what state might have the highest level and bring it. Maybe Florida, maybe the closest to them. Current leadership in Florida, very unlikely to do that. But again, no statute of limitations. In the future, somebody could be taking a look at that. How might that look, actually trying to prosecute a federal official with a state murder charge? There is some precedent for this. Very old case, David Nigel had been assigned to protect a Supreme Court justice. He was a federal marshal, Justice Field, who was very worried about belligerence and threats from a lawyer with a violent reputation named David Terry. There's a long history of Terry and his wife directing threats at judges, even trying to assault the judges. So the then Attorney General appointed Marshal Nigel to be the personal bodyguard to Justice Field. August 14th, 1889, David Terry approaches the justice inside a California train station at a depot. Terry walked towards the justice, hit him in the head so hard, knocked his glasses off, looked like he was going to hit him again. He was rumored to carry a big knife. U.S. Marshal Nigel shot and killed him. He was charged, the marshal, with murder under California law. He was a federal official, but he was charged with a state murder. In the preview of what no doubt would be the modern defense strategy, the U.S. attorney in San Francisco filed a petition for habeas corpus to get him released. Now, what would happen in a modern defense strategy? Similar type of idea, try to get removed to federal court, maybe. In this case, the issue went up to the Supreme Court, not over how the marshal was acting, but whether he could be prosecuted in state court, not that issue, but whether he was acting as a federal official, because there was no specific law or authorization for bodyguards for Supreme Court justices. The Supreme Court, perhaps not without some self-serving interest, held that the president could appoint that through the Attorney General to provide the justices with federal protection. Non-issue today, U.S. Marshal Service are tasked with giving security to all federal judges. But what we see here is how the modern equivalent would involve the question of whether or not this official was acting within the scope of his duties. That's where it's really going to come down to, and that would be what the fight would be. Because if he was, it's basically going to be an immunity defense. He can't be prosecuted by the state court if he was doing his federal job. Supremacy clause would kick in. It'd be pretty much complete immunity. However, the distinction between the 1890 case of Nigel and the current facts, it would be much more analogous to Nigel if Marshal Nigel had just randomly selected a person in a train station and shot them, killed them, and then claimed he was actually defending the justice. That's more analogous to what's happening here, with Hegseth having no evidence that the people who are to be targeted to begin with are smuggling drugs or terrorists of any kind, no evidence that they're posing a threat to the United States, and obviously no evidence that the people who were clinging to wreckage in the ocean could possibly be posing a threat to the United States or to any of the military personnel there. So the question of whether he's a federal official performing their duties to protect the United States seems like it will be pretty weak in the context. But nonetheless, we can see from this analysis where the different issues would be. And the critical point here about a prosecution by a state would be that the president could not give a pardon, right? Trump couldn't pardon him. Now, Trump may try to pardon him in advance for any federal crimes, but he can't do anything about those state crimes. So that's an important aspect of that. What really should happen here is really a multi-pronged front, right? There should be congressional oversight hearings. Looks like they're going to be questioning some people, including the admiral. And they need to have experts on military justice there. They need to have JAG Corps advisors so they have good questions to ask. They could even give people immunity to testify here to really get to the truth here. And based on what they find, if there's good potential evidence there of the wrongdoing, then they should and could seek impeachment of Hegseth. All these things could perhaps be circumvented by the Trump administration if they were to actually have DOJ open an investigation on Hegseth for possible federal murder charges. Sounds crazy, but be a brilliant strategy move, because then they could use their favorite excuse, active investigation going on. Of course, would result in nothing. But that would put Congress in a position of having to decide granting him the immunity question, whether to testify or not. So it's a lot to sort through. It's a very complex and such an unusual situation because of the blatant kind of cowboy aspect of the way Hegseth and Trump behave here. And Congress can perform a great service by pushing this forward, looking for transparency. And if the facts emerge that Hegseth has committed an impeachable offense, they should push at least to make the record right now. Even if they don't have the majority to get the impeachment started, they do have enough of a voice to make the actions transparent to the American public. So we'll keep an eye on this for you.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.